Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Hopefully you're really enjoying the course, learning new things about things that, hopefully you can see you won't be reading them anywhere, and this section is going to be no different. We're going to be going over payrolls and unemployment. What a fantastic section we've got coming up. Really, really important piece of data. You can see it's the I was going to say the first red piece of data, but really it's one of the only red pieces of data. So it's this and then the FOMC, which you can see are really, really up there with the most important, widely followed pieces of data. I would go as far as saying, to an extent, if you just followed payrolls and FOMC, and maybe to an extent CPI, you pretty much covered all bases, and I'm going to show you why that is. Obviously do follow the survey data, very, very important, as I mentioned before. However, this is just that little bit, because what it is, as I mentioned to you, with the survey data, it's a survey, right? It's subjective, it's qualitative. Now you're starting to get into serious data, quantitative, actual, I guess you could say, actual, with obviously GDP is output, but with labor, so labor statistics, which is the payrolls, is actual jobs, right? Actual employment. If I could spell it, actual employment. So really, really important that you recognize the distinction here. And we've talked about it many times, but we're going to keep talking about it. Is, now we're getting into actual data. So the point is, and I'm going to show you this in a second, everything boils down to, in my opinion, the central bank. And you see that as traders, you don't need me to tell you, especially if you've been trading for some time, you can see the influence that the Federal Reserve has on markets, on financial conditions as a whole. Do they really want to encourage people to invest in high yielding, and to an extent I would say equity is obviously high yielding, as in you're trying to earn more when you invest in the stock market than you do in a bank. With obviously a bank, it's relatively risk free and therefore the rewards are much lower. With the equity market, obviously you're more likely to generate more yield, and therefore the Federal Reserve will try to control that to an extent, because they either want to encourage people's asset value and ultimately net worth to be driven upwards, or obviously you might say, hey Envy, don't they always want that to be driven upwards? Yeah, they do, but not to a overheated extent, right? You've seen people's wealth, if it goes up faster than GDP, then obviously, maybe you haven't seen this, but it's obvious, right? If someone's wealth is going up 10% a year, 20% a year, and the economy is only growing 2%, so let's write some of this down. And I know this is a little bit off topic, but like I said, I don't script any of this, and this is why, because I can just kind of free flow a little bit. Very, very important. These little things, nuances, are not explained very well because they don't fall into specifically the topic of labor, but ultimately everything is linked together. All flows together, right? Labor drives GDP, equity market growth drives GDP, because if you think about it, what do people have in their retirement accounts or, holdings? They've got equity markets. If the Federal Reserve has loose monetary policy, they're encouraging equity markets to obviously go up. What happens when equity markets go up? People earn more money on their assets. What do they do when they earn more money on their assets? They spend more money. What happens when they spend more money? Do you remember the circular flow of income? Right? Do you remember expenditure? Right? If consumer expenditure from households, that's a terrible drawing of a house, but this is why it's important I explain the circular flow of income to you. If expenditure is going up, and actually probably the best way to explain this is if I redraw this slightly, just to add a leg into the circular flow of income. Just bear with me because this is very important. So you see households, obviously consumer spending. So think about the income that they receive, right? We said that there's only a firm here, a factory or whatever, right? They go to work, right? And you see why I'm explaining this is linked into payrolls or employment, right? So they go to work, they have a job, right? They're on the payroll, right? They're employed, which we're going to get into. So very, very relevant here, the BLS data, which is basically measuring the number of people going to work here, providing factors of production, as we said. They receive wages, right? But they're also receiving income. Obviously they may have some savings we talked about here, leakages. Some of those savings may invest in the stock market. But obviously the Federal Reserve will encourage that to an extent. Obviously by lowering interest rates, people won't want to save in the bank because they'll think, hey, I'm only earning, as we know now, historically low rates. I'm only getting 1%, 0.5%. Let me go and put some in the stock market. What's that going to do if people start investing in the stock market? It's going to drive the price of the stock market up. If the price of the stock market goes up, people who've invested in the stock market are going to receive an income, right? From the, maybe this is more relevant for the FOMC section, but hey, let's just start talking about it now. Income comes in. What are they going to do, this gentleman or lady, what are they going to do with the income? They're going to spend it. Not all of it, but they're going to spend more, right? Disposable income goes up. Where are they going to spend it? They're going to buy more goods, right? Can you see that? So what's going to happen when they buy more goods? More stuff is going to get made to meet that demand. What happens when output goes up? GDP goes up, right? Can you see how the Federal Reserve has a lot of influence in what is going on? And the reason I'm mentioning this to you is because the FOMC ultimately has a dual mandate, which we're going to talk about in a second. And that's why unemployment is so important. And they're looking really at actual data. They want to know. Obviously, the survey data is nice because it's nice and early in the month. It's great for them. But I think survey data is more generally the government and obviously traders. It's very useful for and industry executives. But when it comes to the Federal Reserve and the central bank in particular, obviously they want to work with actual data, right? When they're trying to figure all of this out, should we be creating more of this kind of income flow effect that we see going around here. So as I said, output equals GDP. So obviously, equity prices going up and stimulation from the Federal Reserve balance sheet is going to drive that. One of the other things that is going to obviously drive a healthy economy is this. So, obviously put that to the side for the time being. I talked about the Federal Reserve there. The reason I mentioned all of that is because I wanted you to realize that the Fed is looking at actual data, right? So this is very, very important to them. Why is it so important to them? Because they want to know this, right? This here, factors of production. Why? What happens when people go to work? What happens? They earn wages, right? If people are not going to work, they are not earning wages. Would you agree? Right? When people go to work, if you break this chain or if you reduce it, what's going to happen? Wages are going to go down. If wages go down, are people going to spend more or spend less? As part of this, you don't need to just listen to me. You can obviously start drawing some of this out yourself. I've done hours of work with you now. I want you to, same with the Pro Foundation course if you've done it. My philosophy has always been, ask questions, always question whether what I'm telling you is correct or not, and make sure you follow this same sort of thinking process that I am. You're welcome to disagree with me, but the most important thing is that you follow along and have your own opinion on it. But clearly, it would seem to me logical that if less people are going to work, wages are going to go down, as in the other way, right? Circular flow of income, remember? People going to work, receiving wages. What are they supposed to do with those wages, or what do they do with those wages? Spend them, right? In companies, go to shops, go shopping, buy stuff, right? If they're earning less wages, would you agree they're going to be spending less? Expenditure. C, do you remember C plus I plus G plus net exports? C, consumer spending is going to go down, right? If wages go down. If consumer spending goes down, what happens? Output goes down. What happens to GDP? Goes down, okay? So can you see the Federal Reserve need to know how many people are going to work? Right? Absolutely crucial. That is why it's so important that you recognize why this number is so important. I just don't feel it's explained too well. People just say, well, hey, it's obvious. Obviously, you need to know how many jobs are in the economy. Well, hang on, why? Do you see? Comes back to the circular flow of income. That's why you need to know. Because less people going to work here, if it goes down, wages go down, right? So expenditure goes down. It's a disaster, okay, for the economy. Now, just like I said, they don't want equity prices to go up too much. Obviously, they need to put the brakes on things at times. It works both ways, right? They want maximum unemployment. Going mad here. They want maximum employment, and I'm going to show you that in a second, which they don't really define. And I'm going to show you how they kind of describe this. But the point is, they want to make sure that the economy reaches a maximum level of employment or a very minimal level of unemployment, which, if you think about it, we've got it here, don't we? So if you go to your Payrolls tab and scroll to the side, can you see unemployment there? Let me just get rid of that. They want the unemployment rate to drop, obviously, as low as possible. And what happens then is, if the labour market becomes too tight, think about it. If there's, at some point, there aren't going to be enough, theoretically, there's going to be too many companies. Obviously, when it's, so let me, you can see it's very difficult to explain. Remember I said to you, this is the hardest section, the understanding section, because I'm a trader, right? I don't explain this stuff to people every day, so forgive me, but I will come out. When the economy is doing really poorly, and the Federal Reserve is trying to stimulate the economy, and jobs are the payrolls are going down and unemployment is high, would you agree there's more people chasing jobs than there are jobs, right? Obvious, that's why unemployment is so high, because loads of people want a job but they can't find it. It also works the other way. So there will be times, okay, so I don't know where you are in the economic cycle. Right now, the economy is doing really well. 2022, you might be in 2023, 4, 5. I don't know where it might be doing poorly. Right now, it's doing so well that, as you can see, the unemployment rate is now getting very, very low. And what tends to happen is, rather than too many people chasing jobs, it's the other way around. You've got basically too many companies looking for workers, right? Because demand is so high, right? GDP right now, in 2022, it's running very high, around 5%, right? And do you remember what I said? The long-term capacity of an economy is around 2% GDP. So demand is so high right now for goods and services. That's why GDP is so high. That factories aren't able to produce goods fast enough. They need more workers to help to expand. So demand is really high. And the problem is, what happens is, it causes inflation, right? Because if you can't get someone, what do you have to do? Offer them more money, right? In the same way, the prices of goods and services go up if there aren't enough of them. If there aren't enough workers to take these jobs, the prices of those workers goes up, i.e. their wages, right? So their wages go up. All of this is relevant. You might be thinking I'm on a tangent. I'm not. It's relevant because wages as well are measured in this survey. Okay, in the employment survey, you're going to see that in the payroll survey. Wages, average hourly earnings, very, very important, followed by the Federal Reserve. They want to make sure inflation isn't getting out of control. It's one part of inflation, because if earnings are going up too fast, that's too much money chasing too few goods. What's going to happen? It's going to cause inflation. So the Federal Reserve, believe it or not, whilst they want employment to be, maxed out, they don't want it to get too aggressive. You know, like they don't want to. It's called a tight labour market. Basically, they don't want it to such an extent where wages start getting out of control. So they need to decide, when are we going to raise interest rates? Obviously, they will factor that in. That, hey, you know what? We're at maximum employment now. The economy is doing really well. Let's calm things down a little bit and make sure it doesn't get too overheated the other way, right? So can you see? They can't make those sort of decisions based on surveys, and I'm being a bit crude or crass here when I say, you know, these surveys, as much as they're important, I mentioned to you the PMI surveys, it's basically a survey going out to some bloke, and I'm downplaying his importance. It's very important, the executives. But because I want to highlight and exaggerate just how important this number is, because it's actual numbers, it's a big difference, because the Fed can't rely on these surveys totally, because it's basically a survey going out to some bloke in a company saying, hey, you know, we talked about the ISMs, you know, are you hiring people at the moment? And you'll be thinking, yeah, we are. Do you see? It's very subjective. This isn't that type of survey. It's actual. It is a survey because obviously you can't measure accurately the employment of, you know, millions of people. So they do send it out to a subset. So it is kind of a survey. But the responses, and also with the payroll, are very much like yes and no, you know, answers in the sense of numerical. You know, is it a job? Yeah. Has this person got a job? And that will feed into the employment statistic. So it's actual data. It's the actual number. Physically, literally, you're seeing the actual number of people employed. So obviously that's much more quantitative, right, than a qualitative survey where you're asking someone's opinion. Right, you're asking someone's opinion. So hopefully you can see why payrolls is so important to not only the FOMC but everyone really. You know, governments and organizations and so many people will be looking at employment. Even think of it from a government perspective, right? What makes a population happy, right? Yeah, GDP is important. We talked about it. It's having a job. Ultimately, what do you care if growth is going up or down if you don't have a job? It's really not helping you, right? So ultimately, you could argue this is arguably one of the most important releases in the whole month, in the whole year, in the whole everything. That's why you'll constantly hear about payrolls. Everyone will go on about payrolls being the most important statistic, aside from the FOMC, because obviously the FOMC control interest rates, which can have such a far-reaching effect. But hand in hand, they go hand in hand. And you know, I'm saying a lot, but it's because I cannot stress how important this number is. It really is everything. You know, if you don't have a job, think of this. I'm going to draw it again, and I want you to think about this. I want you to draw the circular flow of income. So important. Any type of fundamental analysis I do, I'm thinking of the circular flow of income. C plus I plus G plus net exports. Okay. What is the impact of this data? Every data release I look at, how does it impact this equation, right? How does it impact the circular flow of income? Wages, expenditures, right? Obviously here you've got business investment, you've got government spending, and so on and so forth, right? So obviously these are all kind of separate, but ultimately the labor force is going to be the biggest factor, because consumers go to work, right? Here. Just going to go over this one more time. I know it's repeating it, but very, very important. Consumers go to work, they receive wages, they spend their wages, output goes up, GDP goes up, everyone's happy. You suddenly start to play with this number of people going to work. It has a direct, virtually one-to-one, 100% correlation with wages. If wages are not coming in, expenditures not going out, GDP is going to tank. Okay, and not only that, people are going to be pretty annoyed, right? If they don't have a job, it's not good for government policy. You know, you're not going to stay in government very long as a party or a president unless people have jobs, right? It's basically everything. Having a job, being able to look after your family and all of that. So very, very important. So anyway, look, we've hammered home to death there why this thing is important. So, you know, really make yourself comfortable now in your own time that is probably the biggest driver of consumer. In fact, it is the biggest driver, right? If you don't have a job, you can't spend money, right? We're not all, you know, unless you win the lottery or something. And let's be honest, we're not going to win the lottery anytime soon. So we've got to get a job. If that doesn't happen, there's no consumer spending, there's no economy. It'll be a complete disaster, right? So this is virtually everything. Every trader will be watching that to see the payrolls number. You know, if companies are not hiring people, GDP is going to be hit. It's as simple as that. If companies are hiring people, GDP is going to be hit the other way, right? It's as simple as that. And remember what I said, all roads lead to GDP, okay? And if the FOMC start to see unemployment go up, or obviously the payroll number go down, you know, they're going to factor that into a potential decision that they take. And obviously that's going to impact equity markets and so on and so forth. So I think, like I said, I've hammered that home. Let's go and actually have a look at this payroll number. So let's remind ourselves, just get the calendar out here. So if you go to your calendar, just make sure everything is correct. Make sure I'm not blocking anything. Nope. So if you go to your calendar, I've got it open here already because I've just had a release earlier this month. But remember, it's in week 1, right? So don't forget, you should know this like the back of your hand now. It's over here, week 1, right? First week of the month after the ISM surveys, which are very, very important, but obviously non-farm is just that little bit more important. So you'll see it here on the first, Friday, right? Typically of every month. Can you see these 3 releases? Average hourly earnings, non-farm employment change, and unemployment rate. And I'm sorry to keep banging on about this, but it's just shocking how few people look at payrolls and actually understand what it is. It's actually embarrassing, and you know, I'm really glad you're doing this because we're going to change that now, right? So don't worry if you don't know. I'm going to make sure that you know better than anyone else. I keep saying that, but literally, you're going to be amazed the amount of detail we go into with this, and potentially you will be thinking, wow, I didn't realize I knew that little about it. But that's a positive thing because now you will do. So what basically happens is there's 2 different surveys, okay? Like I said, a lot of people don't realize this. So firstly, it's done by the BLS, okay? So it's a government department. Another reason why it's that much more important than the ISMs, because the ISM is obviously a independent third party, although you know, brilliant organization. It's not part of the government. This is actually a government organization. So obviously very, very important to the government and to the nation as a whole, right? So it's done by it's the first thing you need to take a note of is it's done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, okay? So I think they've got around 2,000 employees, so a massive organization that is part of the federal government, responsible for all sorts of things. Obviously, part of that is collecting data that helps the government make decisions. You know, if people are losing jobs, oh my God, panic, we've got to act on that. We need to change government policy. And, you know, local, what you call them, states in the US, obviously, apologies, I'm from the UK. I forgot that their name is states, right? They're broken into different states. Obviously, the governors of each state will need that information. How are they going to make decisions otherwise if they don't know if people have got jobs or not, right? It's so critical. So that's why it is part of the government, essentially. So it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They send out all sorts of surveys. They're also responsible for the inflation data. So let's spend a little bit of time just getting familiar with them. But the point is that they do 2 surveys. Okay, so this non-farm employment change, right, it's known, a name for it is payrolls. So you may have heard of that name, payrolls. You know, payrolls was up 100, 200,000 this month and so on. And don't worry, we're going to go into a lot of detail. Most people spouting all that stuff, they don't have a clue what payrolls really is. Same for unemployment rate. I'm going to explain to you what this rate is. It's actually done by 2 different surveys. It's not the same survey. Okay, so this unemployment rate is a household survey. Okay, I would suggest, if you can, take some notes during this because it is quite an important section. I'm going to do my best to explain it. Obviously, like I said, as you guys know, I'm basically a full-time trader. I'm not a economics teacher, so I don't explain this to people all the time, but I'm going to do my best, and that's why I take some notes. I will do my best to explain it in probably better detail than an economics teacher, but that's my opinion. But I think you're going to agree with me when you see how much detail I explain it in. But household survey, and then you've got this, it's called the establishment survey, okay? Establishment survey, or payroll survey, okay? There's various names for it. Payroll survey. It's also called the CES, and this is called the CPS, I believe. So yeah, like I said, 2 different surveys. We're going to talk about them in a second, but really important you realize that. Not a lot of people realize that these are completely different employment surveys. So the unemployment rate is, as you may have guessed there, done by sending a survey to households. The payroll survey is done by sending a survey to establishments, to businesses, okay? And they're completely different. But don't worry about that. We're going to actually go into a lot of detail, and I'm going to give another chance for you to take some notes and really explain to you these 2 different surveys and kind of how they're different. I don't think that the information anywhere that I've seen, you can try Googling it, is a little bit like the ISM. It's terrible, okay? I've done a lot of research, not necessarily for the course, but over the last, when I was in investment banking, obviously, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but my boss, who was not a very nice person, but in hindsight, I think he was helping me. Literally, I couldn't get even one word out of the guy when I was asking, what are these surveys? I didn't even know there were 2 surveys. He just said, good luck, go and find out. And in those days, you're talking 15, 20 years ago, there wasn't even that much great like Google and internet access. There was, but obviously there wasn't as much widely available information. And it helped me because I really had to dig deep, ask 100 people, find out things about this stuff. And I learned a lot. So I'm going to obviously pass that on to you now. So I'll really be able to add some value to you in terms of your understanding of this that you won't find on anywhere. You can try Googling it, you won't find it. It's just not explained properly, even in this age where there's so much information out there. So what we'll do, let's get onto the website. So if you go to the Bureau of Labour Statistics, you can click here or you can Google it, right? Click on that. For some reason it's opened over here. Apologies. Just make sure I'm not covering anything. Okay, now it might be a little bit small here on mine, but obviously just put up with it for the moment. There should be a home page, and what you want to do, okay, is hopefully when you come to do this, it's the same layout. It might be slightly different, but this website is absolutely insane. There's so much information here. I could be wrong, but if I just left you to it and said, good luck, try and figure out, where all this data comes from, it's not, obviously with the ISM, it was just there, and to be fair, the ISM was a disaster as well. GDP was a little bit better, wasn't it? The BEA had a pretty decent website. I don't know what it is about this BLS website, but it's so difficult to find any information. So rather than just let you have a look for it, because I think you'll get lost, I'm actually going to show you where I think the best sections are, because it is vast. Okay, this website is vast. You could literally spend 6 months on this website and still maybe not find what you're looking for. Okay, there is just so much on this website. It's completely insane. Okay, so let me cut some of that pain and misery for you and just tell you where I think you should be going. Okay, because obviously, like I said, I do just want to make sure the information I'm giving you in these modules is correct. So I did do quite a bit. I'll be honest with you, I spent many hours on this website to make sure the information I give you in this module is correct. So I feel that this is the best place that you should go to, but I did notice how vast it was and that you could get completely lost, right? be clicking on all these things and pages, hundreds, thousands. So what you need to do, right? So first you can obviously go to the history, and you can kind of have a look around, and I wouldn't really spend that much time on it. Obviously if you were going into an economics department, you would want to spend time doing this. I think as a trader, it's really not going to add that much value. You can have a look at we're not going to do this together, don't worry. It's just tells you a little bit about the history, obviously how the organization came around and, got created. And, like I said, it is a part of the federal government. You can see there, .gov. Okay, so very, very important organization. What I found is this little section, and I think it's the best section. Okay, it's called question and answers. That is going to save you, months. Okay, literally, I think as a trader, a full-time trader, this has everything that you need. So click on this, question and answers. We'll bring you here. As part of your kind of tasks, I want you just to kind of read through this. What is the Bureau of Labour Statistics, and it's got all of them. I think you can expand them all. Just have a read. Literally, it won't take you more than 10 minutes. You can just have a quick read through them. You'll see, all the stuff that you need to know. I think it's all right. It gives here an answer in terms of what is the BLS. It's got 2,000 employees working at headquarters nationally. I think they've got 6 offices somewhere. Yeah, 6 regional offices. Economists, statistician, data scientists, technology specialists, researchers. You can see the government puts a lot of capital into making this organization up and run and so on and so forth. Very, very important organization for them. It supports the mission to foster, promote and develop the welfare of wage earners, job seekers, improve working conditions, advance opportunities. One of the things they haven't mentioned here, right, and is very important, so this part of the FAQ is all right, it's not that great, is I mentioned to you before about the circular flow, and government policy will be massively dictated by employment, right? If people have not got jobs, government is going to have to do something seriously drastic to change that, right? Whether they spend more on projects to try and stimulate the economy and create jobs that way, or whether they do change other policies, or indirectly try and, they're not supposed to, but influence monetary policy committee to get more loose, or taxes, right? Lower taxes or whatever. Lower tax rate can obviously stimulate the economy, and play with business taxes and encourage corporations to hire more, and all sorts of things they can do. How do they do that unless they know the employment rate? So that's not explained very well here. I actually forgot one step, and I do apologize, but it's very, very important that you look at this. Okay, so we talked about it in the first section when I talked about the circular flow and the FOMC and so on and so forth. So I'm going to come back to this FAQ section. Okay, I want you to keep it open. One thing, okay, I talked about the FOMC having a dual mandate, and they look at inflation. They want maximum employment, right? Completely forgot to get into that. So what you need to do, right, go to the FOMC website. I just happen to have the meeting minutes here. Federal Reserve, just go and find it. Might not be in the same week, because obviously the minutes might not get released the same week as your payrolls. It just so happens to be here. Go and find the FOMC website. You can Google it, FOMC, and it will come up, Federal Reserve. Okay, so it will come up with the federalreserve.gov homepage. Again, another government website, so you can see all on the same kind of servers as the BLS, so all interlinked. And then what you need to do, right, and it's monetary policy. You can see how lost you could get on this website. That's why I'm here, to help you, right? Just something else for me to shout about. But obviously I'm just kidding. But it is helpful, right? If someone points this stuff out to you, you can see it'd be completely lost otherwise. So what you need to do, so monetary policy, go to, where is it? About the FOMC, I think, can't remember. Meeting calendars, no, transcripts and other information. No, I don't think that's it. Okay, I found it. So what you need to do, go back to, so monetary policy, right? So go to the home page. I just want to make sure we all get this. So make sure you get this. So homepage, right? Monetary policy. Can you see this? FOM, and if it's not there, you can ask me. I'll send it over to you, but should be there when you go on. FOMC long run goals and monetary policy strategy. If you click on that, can you see it's come up with this? Okay, now see if make sure I'm not blocking this. Can you see the federal FOMC, basically Open Market Committee, is firmly committed to fulfilling its statutory mandate from the Congress of promoting maximum employment, stable prices, and obviously interest rates, right, to control those. And if you come down here, right, so we know about the inflation target. I've told you 2% in the past, but you can see in order to anchor longer term inflation expectations at this level, committee seeks to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time. And I think they actually changed this. Can you see it's reaffirmed in 2021? I think it used to be I think they said it should be 2%. I think they changed it to averages, because I don't know if you remember, obviously you will know this because you'll be watching this as in after me. Inflation right now is completely crazy. It's gone up to about 7% year on year, way above target. So what they've done is they've kind of made it an average 2%, so they can have it as an average over time. I think before it used to be quite strict at 2%, but anyway, the point is it's in their mandate. Can you see there, the 2% number? And that's why I've talked a lot about 2% when we had the inflation, but that's not the point. Point is this: they have a dual mandate, okay? They're tasked by Congress to make sure inflation doesn't get out of control, as in obviously consumer obviously being affected by too high prices. That obviously lowers the level of kind of standards of living. If prices obviously go up, that's obvious, right? You're not going to be too happy if the price of things start doubling around you. That's going to affect you badly. The other thing is employment. So can you see here the maximum level of employment? So they basically are targeted with achieving here. The committee is prepared to use its full ranges to achieve its maximum employment and price stability goals, right? So let's just remind ourselves of, where was it? So their mandate is promoting maximum employment, right? Do you remember we talked about this at the start of this section where I talked about promoting maximum employment or as low unemployment as possible? And do you remember I said the Fed doesn't really define that. Here's how they define it, okay? The maximum level of employment is broad-based and an inclusive goal that is not directly measurable. Okay, so there's no number that they need to hit. It changes over time owing to non-monetary factors that affect the structure and dynamics of the labor market. And obviously there'll be things going on structurally in the labor market that will change what they perceive to be maximum employment. But I kind of have my own. I use a bit of common sense and obviously my experience working with institutional traders. So you have your dashboard over here, and if you look at, and in fact, I don't know if that's the best place. Maybe. The reason I say that is because our unemployment on here only goes back, if you check on your dashboard, I think it only goes back a couple of years, right? We've got unemployment. What I've found is generally it's around 4%, I think, unemployment rate is maximum, because obviously the whole of the US is not going to be employed, right? 100% is impossible, having a 0% unemployment rate. So there has to be like a kind of natural maximum, right? Taking into account number of people who are just naturally going to be unemployed and seeking work, right? So that, if you look at the unemployment rate, you see we're getting there, around 4% now. The labor market is getting quite tight when I look at this. But what you can see, what I do is I just look over time. The reason I took it here, because you can go back many, many years. So if you see here, jumps in the unemployment rate do coincide with changes in monetary policy and obviously recessions, and unemployment goes up when you have a recession. So do you remember the 2008, the housing crash, and you see how unemployment started to go up? But heading into that, we had a very tight labor market, and where were we? Around 2%. Can you see that? About 4.2%, okay. So it's this region, can you see that? For me, I believe the Fed, and no one really, there is no number out there. You just saw what the Fed has written in its own policy guidance, that is not measurable, it doesn't have a fixed number. But I believe this is, common sense tell me this is kind of the level they're looking at before they start thinking, right, we've done our job, we've reached maximum employment, and we want to make sure it doesn't get too tight, as in, then you start having inflationary pressures. So that's something I just wanted to mention because I completely forgot to mention that to you. So sorry for jumping around a little bit there. Let's go back and carry on with what we were looking at here, which is the BLS website. Okay, so do you remember we were looking at Q&A? Okay, so let's go back to that. What is Bureau of Labour Statistics? Obviously, you've had a look at that now, and that's why it came up, right? Because I said it's not mentioned here. It kind of tells you what they do, but it doesn't tell you that it's a massive part of helping the Federal Reserve make the decision. You see, their job is to reach maximum employment. If they didn't have this data, they might as well not go to work, right? How's Jerome Powell, who's the FOMC chairman at the moment, probably going to be a different FOMC chairman when you come to do this course. How's the federal FOMC chairman that is there at the time that you're watching this, going to do his or her job, right? And they don't have this data. Might as well not go to work, right? The whole economy would crumble, wouldn't be able to set interest rates. You can see why it's so important, the work that they're doing. So what is the work they're doing? So they set out this number, right? They obviously want to let people know how are jobs doing in the economy. And by the way, I know this section's gone on quite long. I may split it out into part A and part B. I don't know exactly where because none of this is scripted, as I told you. I just you can tell it just comes out, which is the best way because you're getting everything then. So I apologize. I think with the last one, the ISM, I just cut it halfway, didn't I? I cut it and then I made it into a part B. So this may split somewhere here into a part B. Just wanted to mention that I'm not actually going to tell you, hey, part A, part B. So because some of these are dragging on quite long. But anyway, point is, I want you to read all of that. What we're now going to do is I'm going to actually explain to you what is this number, this payroll number that I told you barely anyone actually understands it. There's two different surveys. We're going to take them one by one, but first you need to understand, right? How is it made up? So can you see here, what are household and establishment survey data? The website is vast, okay? You're going to find hundreds of pages about this stuff. This is the best place to bring it all together. And even this doesn't do a great job of it, so I'm going to help you out a little bit. But let's have a look together at these sections, okay? So what you want to do, right, is you want to go to this. You can jump straight to this. What are household and establishment data and how do they differ? And then there's this little link here, right? And you click on this. Monthly Employment Situation Report, quick guide to methods and measurement issues. You see, it's an absolute nightmare trying to get information on this. Do you remember I said this at the start? So I'm going to actually go through this with you and kind of help you out a little bit. Okay, so we're going to read some stuff together. I do want you to read these sections on your own if you can. Do you remember what I said to you, that there's two surveys? Okay, so we're going to kind of maybe make some notes here. So there is let's do the household here. Okay, so I'm going to keep flicking back and forward a little bit, okay? So ultimately there's three releases, right? Average hourly earnings, non-farm employment change, which seems to be the one that everyone goes crazy over and follows and, like a hawk. And then unemployment rate, obviously very important as well, but more so for the government and maybe the FOMC. But for traders, they seem to latch onto this employment change rate a lot more. So we're going to go through these in turn, okay? But where do they fit in? So average hourly earnings and non-farm are one survey, okay? So that's the payroll. I want you to make notes on this, okay? Because you're not going to find this. Some of the stuff I tell you is very difficult to find out there. Some of it is explained on that page, but take some notes, make some notes, split them out. I want you to understand this, and then the unemployment rate is from a different survey, okay? So I'm gonna, because I have to flick back and forth, I'm gonna get rid of this. Okay, so let's do this. It's the first time I'm doing this, so forgive me if it's a bit disorganized, but I think it's the best way to do it. So I make sure I don't miss anything out. So here we're gonna have, how should we do this? Survey, household, and payroll. You could even write survey here if you want, but I haven't got enough space, so I'm just doing it there. This is responsible for what? Unemployment rate, okay, which is that. Okay, and this is responsible for payrolls, or non-farm employment change, okay, which is called payrolls. NFP, right? You must have heard of that. NFP, and this is the unemployment rate. Different surveys, different labor surveys. What we're going to do is I'm going to explain them, or we're going to go through the site, have a look what the BLS have to say about that, and I'm going to give you some extra information as well. Okay, so we're back on this page. So can you see, right? Well, the reason I'm explaining this to you, because when you read this, you'll be lost if I don't at least get you started and tell you why there's different surveys, or what are they talking about when they say, when the BLS say we have different series or surveys basically. So can you see here it says payroll survey. On this page you can locate documentation about the methods, etc, etc. Payroll survey methods and measurement issues, and you don't really need to go through all of this. The bit that I want you to actually look at, right, which is going to be more useful for you, is this: comparing payroll and household survey employment. Okay, so click on that. Okay, and there's this thing called side-by-side comparison of survey concepts, definition. So click on that. Okay, there you go. Okay, this is really comparing employment from the BLS household and payroll surveys. I'm probably blocking a lot of this, so I do apologize. Okay, so you can see it's just a mess, right? Unless I tell you this stuff, and I'm not saying that in an arrogant way. I just want to just highlight why I'm taking so long to explain all of this, because I was a bit worried. You know, it'd be easy for me to say, hey guys, just go and have a look yourself. You'd be a little bit lost trying to find any of this stuff. Because it's not very clear. Can you see it says here, why are there 2 monthly employment measures? Okay, let's read it together. The BLS, just make sure I'm not covering anything. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has 2 monthly surveys that measure employment levels. Okay, the CPS, also known as the Household Survey. Okay, so again, I want you to take notes as we go along. CPS. Okay. And the CES, okay, so current population survey is the household survey, which is this one, which gives you the unemployment rate. The CES, also known as the payroll or establishment survey. Okay, so payroll stroke establishment. Survey. I probably don't need to write that word survey. What am I doing? Okay, and then I'll just make sure I'm not blocking any of this. The payroll survey is designed to measure employment, hours and earnings in the non-farm sector, okay, with industry and geographic detail. Okay, so this measures employment. So they both measure employment, right? Hours worked and earnings. Okay. Industry and geography. Industry, basically industry. Okay, detail. And don't worry, I'm going to do my own summary with you. I just want to kind of tell you what's on the website, and then I will do my own kind of summary with you, right? Which I think will be a lot clearer when I explain it. The household survey, right? And basically what it is, right? The household survey, let's click into this, CPS. So you come, in fact, I'm sorry about this. It's not, we're going to come back to this page, okay? It's not this page. I wanted to find out just how many people, I wanted to show you the various differences in terms of how many people are being surveyed, okay? So can you see here, it says monthly sample of approximately 60,000. So, it's probably worth us just going back 2 seconds here. So basically they are surveys, okay? Physical surveys sent out to businesses, okay? So this is sent out to, and that's why I went on the CPS page, because it does explain it in a bit of detail there. This is a survey, monthly sample of survey of approximately 60,000, okay? You see why I want you to take notes, because you'll forget this otherwise. 60,000 households. So it's not every household, because how would you send it? You can't send it to, I don't know how many households there are, millions, right? You can't send them out to every, you got to take a sample and assume that is a representation of the whole population, okay? And I believe it's like 90% accurate anyway. And anyway, what'd you do? You send out millions of surveys every month? No, it's not realistic. So obviously they get as big a sample as possible. So can you see this household survey? Just want to make sure I'm not blocking anything. Nope. This household survey goes out to 60,000 households and asks them a bunch of questions, right? And you can have a look at that in your own time. I'll show you where to find all of that. But ultimately, you get these outputs: labor force, employment, unemployment, okay? Slightly different to the payroll survey, which doesn't go to households. It goes to 144,000 businesses, okay? So if it wasn't clear, don't worry, it will start to become very clear to you shortly, the differences between the two. They work well together, okay? You might be wondering, why on earth do they have two different surveys? They like to approach it from two different angles. So they will send these surveys out to households as well as businesses, because they can get different information, slightly different information from each, and get different cuts of it. And this is much more from a kind of industry perspective. This is much more from a population characteristics. So things like demographics and race, and give them different. For us as traders, we just care about one number, but we're not the only people that exist in the world, right? Looking at this, there's much more important uses of this than to figure out whether the S&P is going to go up on a day or currencies are going to go up, okay? It's much more important. There's a well-being of the whole country that governments are relying on this, states and governors and local departments are relying on this. They want to look at things cut in different ways. For them, it's very important. So the BLS will attack this from different angles, basically. So 144,000 businesses, okay? Now, can you see here, you're getting employment, hourly hours, earnings, and you can see that here. Employment, hours, and earnings with industry and geographic detail. Here, you're getting just employment. Okay, you're not getting the industry detail, you're getting more population detail, which kind of makes sense because you're sending it out directly to the population, okay? You're also getting the size of the labor force, and there are some other differences which aren't explained very well here, which I'm going to tell you about. Like I said, we'll do a quick summary towards the end, but those are the big differences, okay, that according to what you see here. Ultimately, you can see they come up with the same kind of trends, and we'll have a look at that in a second. What you can do in your own time, which I highly encourage, is you can go and have a look at how these surveys are sent out and what sort of questions they ask and all of that sort of stuff. I think, let's have a look at, sorry, I clicked on the wrong button. What you can do is, you see here, it's got current population survey, CPS. That's this one, the household survey. You can click on it. There is quite a good section here, CPS FAQs. Let's have a look at that. And it's a complete nightmare. All right, you can see why I'm taking this slowly. Complete nightmare trying to find this stuff because it isn't actually here. So what I would suggest is this section. See how the government measures unemployment. Really great section. So you can read this section. Read this section. Very, very important. It's it'll take you 5 minutes. But to really understand this, okay, click on this. How the government measures unemployment. Okay, and I want you to read this. Okay. Very, very important. You read this, you're going to understand the household survey better than anyone. Okay, and it's important you understand it. We'll have a quick 2-minute read of it together, but I want you to read the full thing. So here you can see, where do the statistics come from for the household survey, which is the CPS, right? So you can see, it's fascinating. It says here, some people think that to get these figures on unemployment, because don't forget, this is the unemployment rate, right? And to be honest, maybe I even thought this 20 years ago when I was a young guy getting into investment banking and people were telling me how important the jobs number was. I probably thought that the government counts all unemployed people, but they don't. So you see here, it says some people think that to get these figures on unemployment, the government uses the number of people collecting unemployment. Other people think that the government counts every unemployed person each month. To do this, every household in the country would have to be contacted, just as they are in the population census every 10 years. This procedure and they'd have to do this every month, right? This procedure would cost way too much and take far too long. People would soon grow tired of having a census taker contact them every month. Imagine millions of households, how expensive it would be for them every month to ask about job-related activities. So there's various reasons. Obviously, that's the main one, why they only contact a sample, 60,000. And it's fascinating. You should read of it, how they select these people and how it's changed. Every month, 1/4 of the households in the sample are changed, so 25%. So no household is interviewed for more than 4 consecutive months. And, they've got all these things to make sure that the data is solid. Then it will say, what are the concepts of employed and unemployed? How do they define someone being employed? It's slightly different to the establishment survey. So you can read about all of that. Who is counted as employed? Individuals who are counted as employed if they have a job at which they did not work during the weather, blah, 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 because they were on vacation, all of that stuff. Experiencing childcare problems, on maternity or paternity leave, involved in so I think these guys are counted as employed, prevented from working because of bad weather. And yes, it's quite funny when you read it, but that's why they need to do a survey. They'll ask them these questions. Who's counted as unemployed? To be able to answer these questions, they need to send a survey out and ask people these questions. So you can actually see here, if you click on their status, employed or unemployed, will be determined by a specific set of questions that go out to these 60. You can see the questions here. The questions used in the interviews are carefully designed to obtain the most accurate picture of each person's labour force activities. And also whether they're in the labour force or not. And we're going to talk about that soon. They'll send them a survey and say, does anyone in this household have a business or a farm? Did you or anyone work for pay or profit? Did you do any unpaid work? And so on and so forth. Last week, were you blah, blah, blah. What was the main reason you were absent from work? Has your employer... I think it's because it based on responses in the reference week to count them as employed in the last month or not. Okay, so that's why they asked them last week. Look at this, some fictional examples. It's fast. Can you see? People just don't understand this at all, right? It's not explained properly. Whereas here, this section is brilliant, right? It's some fictional examples of typical responses that may result in a person being classified as unemployed. To be honest, I'm not going to read through this with you, but read it. It's very, very interesting, and it will explain to you how people are classified as being employed or unemployed in the household survey and how they get into the unemployment rate. As traders, is this important? Probably not. We just care about the unemployment number, but it's good to know. As an economist, obviously this is very important. But as a trader, I still think it's very important you understand where on earth is this number coming from? What does it mean? Okay, it's basically telling you this: the number of unemployed people. How are they categorized as unemployed? Well, here you go. It will tell you here how people are categorized as unemployed and employed. And then this is very important: who is not in the labor force. Okay, as mentioned previously, the labor force is made up of the employed and unemployed. Okay, so what that means is typically people who are actively seeking work. Okay, so the actual formula, but we're going to get into this later, for the unemployed is unemployed, number of unemployed out of this 60,000 that they categorize as unemployed, divided by the labor force. Okay, what is the labor force? It's people who are actively looking for work, basically. And there is a very good section here on the labor force. Let me just see if I can find it. Just give me 1 second. Let's see if we can find the definition of the labor force. Just bear with me, just 1 second. I think it's somewhere here. There you go. Okay, so it was actually in the same section we were just looking at. Okay, so actually it's not. It's actually here. Okay, this first paragraph, right? So as mentioned previously, the labor force. Okay, so what it is, right? What you need to understand is the unemployment rate, right? I don't know how many people there are in the US, about 300 million or whatever it is. Let's say there's 300 million people in the US and X million are unemployed. That is not the I can't even write properly, but that is not the unemployment rate. Okay, that's what everyone thinks it is. It's not. It's less than 300. It's the people in the labor force. People who are actively looking for work. Some people won't be looking for work. They're not considered part of the labor force. So the labor force is made up of only employed and unemployed people. There's going to be some that are not in the labor force, and it will make sense to you in a second. The remainder, those who have no job and are not looking for one, are counted as not. Really important you understand this. Okay, these people are counted as not in the labor force. They're going to school, right? If you go to school, you're not looking for a job. You're not unemployed, are you? You're going to school, basically. So you can't count those people in this formula as part of the job force, right? Retired, right? If someone's retired, you can't count them in the unemployment rate and say, hey, no, you're retired, you're unemployed. It's ridiculous. Of course you can't. So you've got to exclude those people. Family responsibilities, keeping others, they got to look after their sick grandmother, or, obviously hope that doesn't happen, but you know what I mean. Family responsibilities or whatever. Since the mid-1990s, obviously historically, a lot more people were out of the labor force. Less than 1 in 10 people are not in the labor force, but probably still you're talking around 90-95%. So still around 5%, or I don't know what the figure is, are not in the labor force, right? So that's got to be taken into consideration. Okay, so that's why I wanted you to read this section so you understand when I come to do the formula to show you how unemployment is calculated, and I show you it's the labor force, that you understand what on earth I'm talking about. I'm talking about those people who are actively looking for work. So not people who are going to school, not people who are retired, not people who are busy looking after someone who's sick, and you know, family responsibilities and so on and so forth. All right, so read all of this if you get a chance. It's very, very important, and it goes into this household survey section, which we are going to come back to. But you can see how this survey is formed. All right, basically, in a nutshell, let's have a quick recap. It goes out to 60,000 households. You've got 300 million people out there. You can't send it to every single household. You've seen it, it says here itself. It'll be impossible, right? It will cost a fortune, and you know, you wouldn't even get that much of a better result than sending it to 60,000. This sample is selected in such a way statistically, we don't want to get into statistics, but it's statistically collected in such a way that 90% accuracy it's given. So anyway, let's go back. That's enough on the household survey. Let's go back to where we were before. Question and answers. This website, I mean, it's completely crazy. Very, very difficult to find anything. Let's have a look. Where were we? There we were. The quick guide, isn't it? So we were here looking at the differences, weren't we? In fact, it's not even here, is it? It's right at the bottom somewhere, wasn't it? Side-by-side comparison. There we go. Okay, so that was the household survey. And you know, you can see it's done at a slightly different time and what it includes, and you can have a look at that. The payroll survey is different. It doesn't go to households, it goes directly to businesses. Okay, this time it goes to businesses. And again, I want you to do the same exercise. It's the CES, okay? And I want you to go and have a look. The establishment survey, I want you to go and find out about that. Here, isn't it? CES survey. If you click on that, CES methods, quick guide. There you go. Okay. So it will tell you pretty much, you know, all you need to know. Also known as a payroll survey, monthly survey of approximately 145,000 businesses, all employee hours and earnings, concepts, and you know, more information is available here, technical methods, and you know, you can read all of this stuff in your own time. Construction employees, how they collect the data and all sorts of stuff, you know, what they're asking them, how they do it, and collection methods, and have a read of it. Okay, well, I've read this many years ago, but very, very important, you know, have a read through it, sample implementation and all that kind of stuff. This stuff I'm definitely not going to go through with you because I'll just be reading off here. You can do it yourself. I just wanted to highlight to you the main thing, which is here. When you come to, no, I don't know why it's so poorly understood. This is different here. This collection, okay, it's different to that. This is the household, sent to households survey, and this is the establishment or payroll. Businesses, basically, it's sent to businesses, okay, and obviously businesses payrolls, they ask them questions about their payrolls, right? It makes sense. They're going to have very accurate information on their payrolls in terms of, you know, how many hours are people working and so on and so forth. And as I showed you there, you can have a look at a little bit more detail about exactly how it is formed, okay? But for our purposes, that is pretty much it. Very, very comprehensive, but that is pretty much it. What we're going to do, right, is we're just going to finish off now. I just want to explain the final couple of pieces, and then it will all come together nicely for you.